I read a really good article by Mark Francois, the Conservative MP for Wickford and Rayleigh. The article's called "The Appalling Handling of the Lisbon Treaty Sowed the Seeds of Brexit." I'll give you just a brief overview. Firstly, he said that back in 1975 we were told that the EU was going to be for trade only. Then came the Maastricht Treaty, which made us EU citizens, and eventually the Lisbon Treaty replaced it in 2007-2008. He also says that we should have been given a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty, just like Ireland was. Famously, they turned it down the first time, but were invited to vote again. This time the result was in favour of the Lisbon Treaty. So I've decided to take a closer look at the Lisbon Treaty and find out what it's really all about, and how it will affect us in the UK if Brexit doesn't happen. When I first read the Lisbon Treaty, it was about 3 years ago, I found it very confusing. It seemed to be just a list of amendments. As it happens, I wasn't the only one who thought that.
There are 8,500 more words in the new text than in the old one. But since they had the instruction from Sarkozy to make a mini treaty, the Council was then instructed to change the font so that they have less space between the lines, and now they have managed to have 8,500 more words and 62 pages less. So that way we can make a mini treaty. It's not a very sympathetic way the European Council have worked in this case. They took a political decision, they made a political agreement among Prime Ministers that this text should not be put for referendum anywhere. Then they tried to avoid it in Ireland. They realized it was not possible because your courts in this country are still too independent. Congratulations to that. Because you shall know that what is published until now, what is signed by the Prime Ministers, is a text they have never ever read. Never. Why? Because it can't be read. This is not a treaty. This is 300 pages of amendments to 3,000 other pages of treaties. And you can only read it if you take one amendment by one and then look it up in the existing treaties and insert it. We will do that job for you, so that you will have a reader-friendly edition that's possible. They have decided in the Council that it's not allowed for any institution in the European Union to print a consolidated version which can be read before it has been approved in all 27 member states. This is a decision. The European Parliament, we agreed unanimously in the Constitutional Affairs Committee that we wanted a reader-friendly edition, a consolidated version, which could be read unanimously. We will not have it, because higher powers decided we cannot have it. This is an instruction from some Prime Ministers. They do not want the text to be read. The order is sign, read afterwards.
The treaty gives the EU too much power and reduces the ability of member states to prevent decisions that are not right for them. It gives 105 additional powers to the EU on aspects of international relations, security, trade, economic policy and justice. In more than 60 of these areas, member states have lost their right to prevent legislation not in the national interest. It creates an EU foreign minister and a common foreign policy. It allows the EU to create a diplomatic corps and to act on the international stage in the same way as a state. In Article 11, the Union's competence in matters of common foreign and security policy shall cover all areas of foreign policy that might lead to a common defence. In other words, it's obliging member states to increase military spending. The Lisbon Treaty fails to address the lack of democracy. The treaty includes a citizens' initiative whereby 1 million signatures are collected. The Commission must examine the citizens' proposal. There are proposals for national parliaments allowing 1/3 of member states to object to a Commission proposal. But if the European Parliament or the European Council do not support it, the objection will be ignored. With all this in mind, we can't help but wonder where this will all lead. Europe is in trouble. There is a strong anti-EU vibe in Hungary, Spain, Italy, Greece and France. The EU is in danger of falling apart and people are afraid of losing power. In my opinion, it is only a matter of time before the EU becomes an authoritarian force. We have already seen the EU punish Hungary. The quote on screen came from the European Parliament. Was it just an oversight that democracy was omitted from the list? One suggested punishment was a loss of voting rights for Hungary, although it would still have to pay contributions and obey all EU laws and regulations. From the end of 2018, Paris saw protests by the Gilets jaunes against fuel tax, austerity and income inequality. EU armoured vehicles were present on the streets of Paris. These riots may have been used as an excuse for Macron and Merkel to bring up the subject of a European army. I'm still really baffled why a European army is needed. Maybe this army would have been deployed to Catalonia to defend the union's integrity, or sent to Hungary to remove Viktor Orban, who was threatening democracy in their eyes. The question is, can we trust Brussels enough to believe these scenarios would never happen? Julian King, the former UK ambassador to France, who is now the EU Commissioner, wants tech companies to prevent the spread of fake news. There will be an EU list of acceptable news, and anything that deviates even a bit will be labelled as fake. We will only be able to see news and views that the EU agrees with. A sure rein on free speech. Google's algorithm shows news that is anti-EU. The EU Commissioner wants Google to remove any news that deviates from the EU agenda or criticises it. To conclude, for me, the creation of the Lisbon Treaty was the final nail in the coffin with regards to my view of the EU. I was already sceptical as a first-year university student when the Maastricht Treaty was born, but the Lisbon Treaty was a game-changer. It saw the creation of the first President of Europe, the first Foreign Minister of Europe, and it ended the UK's right to veto new EU rules in over 40 policies. It is now more than a decade since we signed the Lisbon Treaty, and over that time we have surrendered more and more sovereignty to Brussels. Therefore, if Brexit is cancelled, the UK will be forced to pay in and contribute to the Common Defence Fund, because I do believe that the creation of an EU army is not just a dangerous fantasy, but a real possibility. I'd like to just end this video with a clip from Nigel Farage talking about how the EU MPs vote. It's a real...
What are MEPs for? Well, I'll tell you. MEPs are here to vote, and to vote often and to vote regularly. Sometimes we vote up to 450 times in the space of 80 minutes. Now, I have to confess, hands up, I don't know what's going on half the time. I haven't even read all of the documents, so massive are they? Now, it could be that my fellow MEPs down there are all Albert Einsteins and all absolutely understand what's going on. But I suspect that's not the case. In fact, it's rather like paying monkeys, because what happens is the civil servants draw up the list, and if it's vote number 58 and the piece of paper says vote yes, you vote yes, and if it's number 59 and it says vote no, you vote no. It is an absolute farce. It is a complete sham masquerading as democracy.